Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. This week you will study King Ashoka because King Ashoka was the most important Buddhist layman in Theravada history. King Ashoka, or can be called Emperor Ashoka, ruled most of India for the middle third of the 3rd century BCE. On the capital of one of the pillars Ashoka erected is beautifully carved a wheel with many spokes. So you can see wheel and spoke in this top figure. This representation of the wheel of Dhamma, which the Buddha set in motion, is the symbol chosen to adorn the flag of the modern state of India. The lions on the same capital are on the state seal. Thus, India recalls its righteous ruler. Ashoka is a towering figure for many other reasons too, but we confine ourselves to his role in Buddhist history. Before Ashoka, Buddhism had spread through the northern half of India, but it was his patronage which made Buddhism a world religion. We know very few hard facts about the history of Buddhism in the century between the Buddha's death and Ashoka's accession. The most important events were the councils, or rather communal recitations. Soon after the Buddha's death, 500 senior monks assembled in Rajagaha and rehearsed his teachings together. This is plausibly claimed to be how the canon originated. A second such rehearsal of the scriptures took place after the settlement of a major dispute over discipline in the town of Vesali. This took place 100 years after the Buddha's death. These are the only two councils accepted by all Buddhist traditions because after the second, the Sangha began to split. It is only the Theravadins who consider that the third council was one held in Pataliputta, and Pataliputta is King Ashoka's imperial capital in the middle of his reign. It is reasonable to assume that the parts of the canon which are unique to the Pali version were definitely added at this council, and that what was recited was much like the Pali canon that has come down to us. Ashoka was the grandson and second successor of Chandragupta. Chandragupta founded the Mauryan dynasty and empire about 324 BCE. We have very little evidence about the precise extent of what Chandragupta conquered, and even less about the activities of his son Bindusara. But Chandragupta's empire may already have covered northern India from coast to coast and probably comprised about 2/3 of the subcontinent. Bindusara and Ashoka extended it further to the south. The capital of the city of Pataliputta, which had been founded as the new capital of Magadha fairly soon after the Buddha's death. Modern Patna is on the same site nowadays. Ashoka's precise dates are controversial. The scholar Agamemnon proposed between 268 to 239 BCE. There are two Asokas. One Asoka is known to modern historians through his inscriptions, and the other Asoka is Asoka of Buddhist tradition. Let's look at Asoka's inscriptions. Asoka left a large number of inscriptions on rocks and pillars. So you can see inscription on the rock in this figure. Asoka dictated his edicts to scribes in Pataliputta and had them carved in conspicuous places throughout his vast kingdom. They record a personality and a concept of rule unique not merely in India, but perhaps in world history. The idea of putting up such inscriptions probably came to Asoka from the Achaemenid Empire in Iran. Asoka recorded his revulsion from violence and killing people and his wishes to spare and care for even animals. This is the example of Asoka's edicts. Rock Edict number 1. No animal may be slaughtered for sacrifice. Edict number 3. Docility to parents is good. Liberality to friends, acquaintances, and relatives, and to Brahmin and recluses is good. Not to injure living beings is good. Economy in expenditure and avoiding dispute is good. Self-mastery, purity of heart, gratitude, and fidelity are always possible and excellent even for the man who is too poor to be able to give largely. So you can see that ethical aspect is highly emphasized. Asoka had begun in the usual warlike way, such as killing many people, but after a successful campaign in Kalinga is modern Orissa, he had a change of heart. He publicly declared his remorse for the sufferings he had caused in the war and said that henceforth he would conquer only by righteousness, Dhamma. This remarkable conversion from what every proper Indian king considered his Dharma to a universalistic Dhamma of compassion and ethical propriety presumably coincided with the conversion to Buddhism, which Asoka announced in what may well be the earliest of his edicts. In that edict, he says that he first became an upasaka. Upasaka is Buddhist layman, but Asoka did not make much progress for a year. Then, however, he went to the Sangha and made a lot of progress. We cannot be sure just what he meant by going to Sangha, but in any case, it clearly involved getting to know more about Buddhism, because only through the Sangha the laity could have access to the scriptures. Almost all of Asoka's inscriptions are about Dhamma. Here's a typo, AL. All of Asoka's inscriptions are about Dhamma. By this, Asoka did not mean specifically Buddhism, but righteousness as he understood it. It is clear that his understanding was greatly influenced by Buddhism. The best traditions of both Buddhism and Indian kingship coincided in Asoka's declared support for all religions. This support went far beyond passive toleration. In other words, he dedicated caves to even non-Buddhist ascetics, repeatedly said that Brahmins and renouncers all deserved respect, and told people never to denigrate other sects but to inform themselves about them. Asoka abolished the death penalty. Asoka declared many animal species protected species and said that whereas previously many animals were killed for the royal kitchen, now the animals were down to 2 peacocks and a deer per day. And in future, even these 3 animals will not be killed. Asoka had wells dug and shade trees planted along the roads for the use of man and beast, and medicinal plants grown for both as well. The influence of Buddhism appears in both substance and style. Other kings have victories. Asoka has Dhamma victories. Other kings go on hunting expedition. Asoka gets much more pleasure out of Dhamma expeditions, on which he makes gift to Brahmins and renouncers and senior citizens. King Asoka tours the country and finds instruction in the Dhamma. Other kings have officials. Asoka has Dhamma officials to promulgate virtue and to look after such a disadvantaged group of people such as old people, orphans, and prisoners. In an edict addressed to these officials, Asoka tells them to follow the middle path by avoiding such vices as jealousy, cruelty, and laziness. This is almost echoing the Buddhist term, middle path. In another edict, he says that people go in for all sorts of ceremonies on family occasions such as marriage, and women especially perform all kinds of paltry and useless rites for good luck, but the only rewarding ceremony is to practice Dhamma. This means treating your slaves and servants properly, and respecting your elders, and acting with restraint toward all living beings, and making gifts to Brahmins and renouncers. The Edicts echoes the advice to Sigala, that is one of Buddhist sutra, appear in Digha Nikaya number 31. It is called Sigalaka Sutta, translated into Advice to Sigala. Sigala is the name of a layman. Like Sigala, Asoka's subjects are to substitute ethical action for traditional ritual, and what they are to do is just what the Buddha recommended. Another sutra named Kuttadanta Sutta, also in Digha Nikaya number 5. In the Kuttadanta Sutta, the ideal king portrayed by the Buddha is the ideal layman. This fits Asoka perfectly. So I strongly encourage students read Sigalaka Sutta and Kuttadanta Sutta in Digha Nikaya. Asoka says it is good to have few expenses and few possessions. Asoka not only urges diligence on others but leads by example. Asoka attends to business at any time, whether he is eating, in his bedroom, in his litter, in the garden, or even on the toilet. Asoka said, "For I am never satisfied with my efforts and with settling business, because I think I must work for the welfare of the whole world." In the longest inscription, Asoka says, people's progress in Dhamma is achieved in two ways. One is by Dhamma rules, and the other is by conviction. Rules count for little, most is by conviction. This reminds us of a perfect Buddhist sentiment. Some scholars have questioned Asoka's Buddhism on the grounds that he never mentioned nirvana or other key concepts of Buddhist soteriology. However, this objection is foolish. There are certain inscriptions which have a purely Buddhist content in the narrowest sense. In an inscription, Asoka announced that he has visited Lumbini. Lumbini is the Buddha's birthplace, and Asoka remitted the village's taxes. In another inscription, Asoka said that he has doubled the size of stupa of a former Buddha and come himself to worship at it. So Asoka went on Buddhist pilgrimage. There are also two remarkable inscriptions addressed to the Sangha. In one inscription, Asoka recommended that they study certain specific text. In another inscription, Asoka says that any monk or nun who split the Sangha is to be made to wear white cloth. White cloth represent revert to lay status, no longer monastic, and any monk or nun who split the Sangha is to made to leave the monastery. The laity are to come each uposatha to check that this is done. The unanimity of the Sangha is a central one in the Vinaya, and he commit the expulsion of dissidents in lending his authority. King Asoka is acting as the perfect Buddhist king who enables the Sangha to keep itself pure. In the passage of one inscription, Asoka said that he has won a Dhamma victory by sending messengers to 5 kings and several other kingdoms. Asoka is said to have built 84,000 monasteries and as many stupas. It seems that in later times, almost every old stupa was attributed to King Asoka. Asoka is also said to have been preternaturally wicked before his conversion by killing 99 half-brothers. The story of Asoka's conversion is that one day Asoka chanced to see a Buddhist novice walking down the street, and Asoka was so impressed by his tranquil deportment that he conceive pasada and invite the novice in the palace. Pasada is the state of a calm and happy confidence that something is so. So this is kind of emotion as much as belief. And there's a side romantic tale that this Buddhist novice was Asoka's nephew. But that is not the point of the episode. King Asoka said to the novice, "Sit down, dear sir, on a suitable seat." The novice went up to the throne. This represents that the most junior monk has precedence over the highest layman, such as the king. Again, significantly, the novice preaches to the king about diligence. Thereupon, King Asoka is converted and starts to feed monks on a vast scale. In due course, Asoka's younger brother and Asoka's son Mahinda and Asoka's daughter Sangamita enter the Sangha. Some non-Buddhists join the Sangha or to dress up as a monk. The true monks cannot cooperate with them. So, Uposatha ceremony was not held for 7 years. The king's first attempt to rectify this leads to disaster when his too zealous minister has some real monks beheaded for this non-cooperation. Then King Asoka invites the venerable elder Tissa, Moggallaputta. Moggallaputta first assures King Asoka that there is no bad karma without evil intention. King Asoka and the elder Tissa, Moggallaputta, proceed to the big monastery the king has founded in Pataliputta. And the King Asoka cross-examines its inhabitants to weed out the non-Buddhist. Finally, Asoka says to the elder like this: "Since the Sangha is purified, let it perform the Uposatha ceremony." And they do so in concord. Then Tissa Moggallaputta organized the third council. They compile the scriptures, of course by reciting them, and he composed the Kathavatu, which is the last book in the Pali Abhidhamma Pitaka. This is one of a Buddhist monastery founded by King Asoka named Sanchi Monastery. The story of Asoka's intervention to purify the Sangha is found in other Buddhist traditions too, although with variant details. It is not corroborated by inscriptional evidence because the inscription cited above does not say that Asoka has actually expelled monks himself. The surviving inscription certainly proves that Asoka took an interest in the unanimity and purity of the Sangha. Scholars have treated the Theravadin account with skepticism because of various implausible features in it. It is impossible to believe that no Upasada ceremony was held in all India for 7 years, and in any case, Asoka's expulsion of pseudo-monks from one monastery would only have rectified matters in that particular Sangha, not in the entire Sangha as a whole. It also seems odd that it should be King Asoka, a layman, who tests monks on their doctrine. But this is hardly out of character for a king whom we know to have put up an inscription telling the Sangha which text to study. Buddhist kings, ever after Asoka, saw it as their duty to act as defender of the faith. For a Buddhist, to defend the faith is to defend the Sangha. King Asoka has been the model for rulers all over the Buddhist world. Within the next 1,000 years, at least 5 kings of Ceylon prohibited the killing of animals. In Burma, Asoka's example has constantly been invoked by kings, and President Nu, modeling himself on Asoka, had innumerable small stupas put up. The great Khmer ruler Jayavarman VII saw himself as a living Buddha, and in his inscription expressed Asoka's sentiments on the material and spiritual welfare of his subject. And the great Khmer ruler Jayavarman announced that he had hospitals built. In 11th century Thailand, King Rama Khamhaeng ordered that for urgent business he should be disturbed even on the toilet. In 5th century China, the Buddhist emperor Lian Yuti went and lived in a monastery with the monks. Of course, before the 19th century, no one had access to the inscriptions or even knew they exist, but they based themselves on Buddhist literary sources. The Shingalese polemicist regarded the Buddha as somehow anticipating Karl Marx, and Asoka is described as the Lenin of Buddhism. According to the text of Theravada, it was the elder Tissa Mogaliputra who sent out 9 missions to border area. This took place in 250 BCE. Each mission was headed by an elder whom the text named and consisted of 5 monks. The quorum required for conferring higher ordination in remote parts. The mission to Ceylon, I pronounced Ceylon in the previous slide, but maybe Ceylon might be more accurate. The mission to Ceylon was headed by the elder Mahinda, and Mahinda is considered to have been Asoka's son. And Asoka's daughter Sangamita followed in due course to establish the order of nuns in Ceylon. 5 named monks are said to have gone to various parts of the Himalayan region. In Abilsa, which is equivalent to ancient Vidisha in central India, relic casket of the early 2nd century BCE have been found inscribed with the names of 3 of these monks and stating that they are of the Himalayan school. The Buddhologist Etienne Lamont argues not only that these missions cannot be those to which King Ashoka refers in his inscriptions. Lamont is skeptical whether there was a concerted missionary enterprise at all. He points out that King Ashoka's Dhamma messengers or ambassadors of righteousness can hardly have been Buddhist monks, because the emperor protected all faith and used Dhamma to mean something much more generally acceptable than Buddhist doctrine. Etienne Lamont argues that the list of destinations in the Buddhist sources on the one hand and the inscriptions on the other hand are discrepant, although they overlap. Another Buddhist scholar named Eric Frauener, on the other hand, accepts the Buddhist account in most particulars. Frauener identifies it with Ashoka's embassies and thus holds the emperor directly responsible. Frauener further argues that the missions set out from Vidisa in central India. Vidisa I introduced in the previous slide, in Bilsa, Bhilsa, in current location in India. In Vidisa in central India, the missionaries' remains were found. Frauener identified the geographical names in the Theravada sources with some of those in the inscriptions and glosses over the difficulty of the date. The geographical identifications are too uncertain to help us. While Lamont is right to point out that some of the areas visited, notably Kashmir, had already Buddhist. But this does not disprove that missions could be sent there. The chroniclers had no interest in recording a gradual and undramatic process and allowed history to crystallize into clear-cut episode which could be endowed with edifying overtones. But this oversimplification does not prove that clear-cut event never occurred. We know from the inscriptions that they did. There is a discrepancy of about 5 years in the date, as the date of Ashoka's embassies are certain. We must not flinch from concluding that on this point the Buddhist sources are slightly out. Maybe Frauener is right about where the missions left from, because the Ceylonese sources say that Mahinda stayed a month at Vidisa. In other words, Vidisa is the same location of Bilsa before going to Ceylon. The monks who composed the chronicles would not have been pleased to record that Buddhism traveled as a sideshow. Indeed, it would not have been relevant to their main purpose as chroniclers, which was to show how valid ordination traditions came to be established. The missions to remote parts were probably responsible for the creation of several of the early sects, which arose because of geographical isolation. What is really most implausible is that it should have been Tissa Moggaliputta who sent out all the missions. The strong evidence of the Kathavatu demonstrated that Moggaliputta was a polemicist for the particular doctrinal interpretations of the Pali school, whereas we know that Kashmir had other sects and schools, such as Vinaya and doctrinal tradition, not the Theravada. Evidently, Tissa Moggaliputta was the chief Theravadin intellectual of his days, and the Theravadin chronicles therefore grossly exaggerated his role in general Buddhist history. King Asoka may well have sought his advice and secured his cooperation. But these missions were from court to court as a product of state patronage. Let's solve the quiz. Who is the grandfather of King Asoka and what is the name of empire founded by King Asoka's grandfather? Second question. Which of the following is not true to King Asoka? You can find the answer to both questions in the lecture video. As a routine process, you will submit 2 quiz answers to email, my email as well as your email, include course code BUD413 and date, February 14. Please just send your quiz answers writing in main text body of email. Do not generate attachment file. And the due of this assignment is 27th of February because 21st of February is official holiday. This is the end of lecture video.